Piece of advice number 2, learn how to relax. Relax. I know you probably think you already know exactly how to do that. In fact, your parents are probably convinced that you've mastered the art of doing nothing for vast stretches of time. But I'm talking about a very specific kind of relaxation, which is useful when we're stuck on really, really hard problems. I'm going to give you an example of such a problem. It's from a category of puzzles called compound remote associate problems. The acronym is CRAP. The rules of the puzzle are simple. I'm going to give you 3 words, and you've got to find the 4th word that can form a compound word with all 3. So the 3 words are age, mile, and sand. What can form a compound word with all 3 of those? So apparently it wasn't that hard at all. So Stone Age, milestone, sandstone. If you solve the problem, and especially if you solved it that quick, you almost certainly solve the problem with a flash of insight, an aha moment. In other words, you had an epiphany. Now, scientists talk about moments of insight, and they define them in 2 very specific ways. One, the answer has to come out of nowhere. I just given you 3 words, and then boom, stone pops into your head. Number 2, the second defining feature of a moment of insight is that as soon as stone pops into your head, you know it's the right answer. The idea is attached with a feeling of certainty. Now, this is a very mysterious mental phenomenon. It's a very spooky thing your brain does. It seems to just share one of its secrets. Now, how does that happen? 2 scientists, Mark Beeman at Northwestern and John Kunios, have done a really nice job of exploring how exactly the brain manufactures these moments of insight. And basically what they do is they put people in a brain scanner, one of those big fMRI machines, and give them these compound remote associate problems. And what they found is that right before the answer appears, right before someone says, aha, the answer is stone, an obscure brain area in the right hemisphere called the anterior superior temporal gyrus becomes active. Now, this is an obscure brain area nobody knows very much about. The only previous study that's really focused on it has implicated this brain area in the processing of jokes. A punchline, in other words, is a minor moment of insight, a little aha moment where we suddenly get the answer and then we laugh. So Beeman and Kunios identified this brain area, and then they hooked their subjects up to a different machine. It's called an EEG. It's like wearing a bulky shower cap. And this measures the brain waves being emitted by your cortex. And what they find is that they can predict up to 8 seconds in advance which people will solve the insight puzzles. In fact, they can predict it so well that sometimes they give people hints. They'll suggest words that sound like the answer sometimes. And what they can find is that based on this brain signature they can pick up from the EEG machine, they can tell you whether or not these hints will be useful. So they can tell someone, you know what, you are just wasting your time. You should just give up now. You are not going to solve these puzzles. So what is this predictive signal? The crucial variable, it turns out, is something called alpha wave activity. Now, like most things in the mind, alpha wave activity remains pretty mysterious, but it turns out to be closely associated with states of relaxation. When you're calm and happy, when you're on a long walk in the woods, or lying down on your bed and listening to your favorite music, your brain is generating some serious alpha waves. Why is a relaxed state of mind so important for creative insights? Well, when our mind is at ease, when those alpha waves are rippling through the brain, we're more likely to direct the spotlight of attention inwards, towards that stream of remote associations generated by the brain. And it is these babbling thoughts, these strange and unexpected connections coming from that obscure bit of brain in the right hemisphere, that turn out to be most useful for solving the hardest problems. We can finally listen when we're in the shower to that quiet voice coming from the right hemisphere telling us the answer is stone. Now, this is rather counterintuitive. Most people, when you give them a really hard problem, they think what they need to do is focus, to drink another cup of coffee or another bottle of Red Bull or pop some Ritalin. They want to focus, focus, focus. That's how you crack the hardest problems. But that turns out to be exactly backwards. That's the worst thing we can do. When we're focused, we end up getting very focused on the wrong answer, so that the wrong answer loops over and over again in your head like a broken record. We repeat our failures again and again. Instead, what we should do is go for a walk. stare out the window and daydream, take a really long shower. Kunios and Beeman tell this great story of one day they brought a Buddhist monk, a trained expert meditator, into their lab, and they gave him these compound remote associate problems. And at first, he's drawing a blank. He's 0 for 30. He can't solve a single one. And they're starting to get confused because he seemed like a smart guy, but maybe he's just not that bright. And so he's 0 for 30, and they can't figure out what's going on. And then, after going 0 for 30, he just goes on this streak where he solves 27 insight puzzles in a row. They'd never seen this before or since. And then when they look back at his EEG data, what they found is that this guy, because he was a trained meditator, he had exquisite control over his attention. And at first, he assumed that the way to solve these hard insight puzzles was to focus on the 3 words, to really fixate on the problem itself. But that got him nowhere. He was 0 for 30. And it wasn't until the 30 failures where he realized, what I've got to do is I've got to relax. I've got to focus on letting my mind wander.